torches together is like, what do we want this badass third identity to be? You know, how do, like, we can create anything we want together, you know, based on our gifts.
Our relationship is our work of art.
Exactly, it's a work of art.
Once there was a farmer. One day his horse ran away. Upon hearing the news, his neighbors came to visit. Such bad luck, they said sympathetically. Maybe, the farmer replied. The next morning the horse returned, bringing with it 3 other wild horses. How wonderful, the neighbors exclaimed. Maybe, replied the old man. The following day, his son tried to ride one of the untamed horses, was thrown and broke his leg. The neighbors again came to offer their sympathy on his misfortune. Maybe, answered the farmer. The day after, military officials came to the village to draft young men into the army. Seeing that the son's leg was broken, they passed him by. The neighbors congratulated the farmer on how well things had turned out. Maybe, said the farmer. All right, so we took a break. We had breakfast. My stomach was feeling empty.
So I was sitting here just kind of talking and we were
monologuing.
I was monologuing on our first take, and I kept looking at Johnny, and I could tell he wasn't really fully here with me, and I started to feel awkward. So finally he was like, you know, I'm just really hungry. And so we turned it off, had breakfast, and now we are back to recording. It's always good to know where you're at and what you need. So sometimes we decide not to record because one of us is maybe just feeling down emotionally, or it's been a long day. So whenever we do record, we make sure that we're in a position where we feel good and we are, I don't know.
It's a good lesson. With babies, people often look for an explanation as to why the baby is being less than pleasant. And often the explanation is a simple, they need to be changed, they are hungry, they're tired. It's a kid's worst nightmare when their mom says, oh, you're tired. You know, I hated that as a kid. But anyway, now, with your husband or your wife or your partner, it can be helpful if they're being ornery to ask yourself, do they maybe just have low blood sugar? Are they over-caffeinated? Are they hungry, tired? Did they have a hard day at work? Things like that. Often there's a very simple explanation that's much less serious and intense than it might seem on the surface.
Yes. So we constantly are taking note of where one another are at. You know, if we've been driving all day and then we blow up, we can usually pinpoint that to the long drive we had, or a lot of times it is over caffeination. Actually, Johnny and I right now are trying to take our caffeine down quite a lot because we both noticed that it makes us a little bit aggro. So
in general, too, we've started to appreciate a much calmer state as our baseline. And caffeine, when I sit and really watch how my body responds to it, I realize that it doesn't make me feel how I want to feel on a daily basis.
And for me, it really gets me going in a way that I don't like. It kind of amps up my anxiety, and then I am more prone to blowing up at Johnny for little things that normally I would not get that upset about. But because I'm over caffeinated, here we go, you know? So now we are fed. We've had breakfast. We had some poached eggs on some purple potatoes, zucchini, and sweet potatoes. It's a common breakfast for us. And we had some chai. And yeah, we're ready to go. Right?
Yeah.
So what are we talking about today?
We're talking about keeping negotiations open.
Johnny and I bought 20 acres of land like 3 years ago. And it was a scary purchase for us. It's a lot of money. It's a lot of land. It's a big undertaking. And I remember when we were getting ready to sign the papers, Johnny turns to me and calms my anxiety by saying a very simple statement. He said, Bailey, everything is negotiable. Everything is negotiable. And it's such a simple little saying, but he made it clear that if something came up, if this didn't work out, if we didn't feel like it was right anymore, we could always sell it, and we could keep open hands with it. And that was super, super helpful to me when you told me that. It really helped me in taking that risk with you.
The paradox of the decision was that I went into it believing wholeheartedly that that piece of land was where I would make my home and was where I would live.
Yeah, we had a lot of stock in it.
Similarly, in deciding to get married, I went into that decision believing wholeheartedly that I was committing myself to you for the rest of my life. And even if we someday get to the point where we decide to go separate ways, I still think it's important that I go into it believing that I'm going to see it through to its end.
Yeah, and when we bought the property, it was the same idea. We went into it thinking this is going to be our home. This is where we're going to possibly raise kids and start a farm. And we had a million ideas for the property, and they were all really exciting. But in the end, it wasn't actually feasible for us. But after we sold the property, we realized how many benefits came from just following that desire to buy property in the first place. So we went in with the intentions and the desires and the dreams, and we left with a completely different outcome than we expected. But we learned so many lessons through it, and we came out with a financial gain also. So it was a gift that we didn't know was coming. We expected it to be something else, and it turned into a completely different thing than we expected. This idea of everything is negotiable can show itself on every level of the relationship, from the huge decisions that we make together to the tiny day-to-day things that we do. When you have a partner who is stubborn and unwilling to work with you on anything, or doesn't want to negotiate on anything, kind of has their expectations of how the marriage is going to be, and they're not fluid, then that creates a space where nobody is growing, and there's not a lot of novelty, because everything is expected. Everything is scheduled. Everything is like you have someone approaching their partner and saying, hey, I want to talk about this. And then if the other person's completely unopen to talking about it, then no growth can be had. And when, like I mentioned earlier, when we purchased the property, the only reason I was able to take that risk is because you told me everything is negotiable. And then I was like, oh man, that's a perfect diving board for risk taking.
I think I felt the same way about the land as I do about how I did when you almost called off our engagement. That the primary, aside from the difficulty and the emotional trauma of you calling off the engagement, the sort of peripheral difficulty of that would have been the social aspect, in having people ask me, how's everything going with planning the wedding? And being like, actually, it turns out we're not getting married anymore. It's almost embarrassing in a way. But I always try to make it known to people that call off their engagements. You've had a number of clients for weddings call off their engagement. Yep. I always try to make it known that I'm incredibly proud and even admire the bravery of those people to do something that does put them in an awkward social situation.
Those people understand everything is negotiable on a real level.
Yeah, just because you've committed to something doesn't mean you should necessarily go forward with that if new information becomes available, or sometimes it's in committing to something that we realize we actually shouldn't commit to it, because as soon as we turn our ship in that direction, we realize that the winds are actually blowing a completely different way. And
Yeah.
oh, sheesh, turn it around.
I think in relationship, we often feel like we don't have freedom. Especially in marriage, there's an expectation of like that we own each other in some way. And so when someone calls off their engagement, they're kind of using their freedom to be like, actually, this isn't what I want. And I think that should continue through marriage. Not that it should be, there's a way to do it that doesn't feel like you could leave at any moment. You know?
I was going to bring up the potential downsides or the dark side of this idea, in that if the possibility of divorce is continually used as a threat, that's problematic. And I think we mentioned before that in couples therapy, having a couple close their exits can be super helpful, so that the exit doesn't become a threat, because that's coercion, that's manipulation, that's shaming, and that's not a good way. Any so-called positive outcome that is a result of those types of tactics is, one, not going to be long lasting, and two, not going to feel very good if you're a person that wants to be in a loving relationship. If you want to be in a coercive, manipulative, dominating relationship, then one, don't do that and go to individual therapy and figure that out.
Yeah. Yeah. And closing the exits is a metaphor. I can't remember what author uses it. Maybe John Gottman.
Chloe Madonis.
Oh, Chloe Madonis. And so that's just a metaphor for, you know, when a couple comes to therapy and they've been going through a lot of shit, basically closing the exits is this idea that for, I think she usually does 90 days. For 90 days, you close all the exits. Nobody can use any threats as like a way of getting what they want out of the relationship. So basically it's this time to build true safety with one another. And for me in our relationship, I feel super safe because you've told me so many times that, first of all, I'm never going to have to deal with anything. And what I think you mean by that is that you're always open to talking about stuff. You're always open to hearing me out. And everything is negotiable goes along with that, because I also know that you are open to change and open to growth in yourself, in me, and in the decisions and the lifestyle that we create. So when we sold the property, it was this moment where both you and I realized this isn't working for us anymore. And if we keep trying to hold on to this dream, you know, the dream has died. We had to accept that the dream had died and move on. And that was a really big example. But even in our day-to-day interactions, I feel like you and I feel a safety with you to be able to bring up something that's on my mind, where I'm feeling anxiety about a decision we've made, or I'm feeling anxiety about our interaction. And you are always so open to hearing me and figuring out, like, do we need to let something die here? Do we need to let go of an expectation we had for each other? And when we let go of the expectations we have over each other, we create beautiful growth on both ends. Like, you grow and I grow when we let go of those old expectations.
I mean, in order to receive something new, you have to have open arms. And if you're still holding on, clinging to some old idea, some old dream, goal, no matter how good and beautiful it is, if it's no longer serving you, it's best to set that down and allow space for something new to come into your life. It's the age-old freedom tactic of quitting sometimes.
Yeah.
Quitting doesn't always mean failure, whether that's quitting a dream, quitting a job. Sometimes quitting is what you need to do in order to begin again.
Yeah. And, also being thankful for the lessons and the things that came from that thing that you're quitting. So I'll use my example, my individual example, actually, of I attended a nutritional therapy certification course a couple of years ago. And I thought that at the end of it, I was going to be a nutritional therapist because that's, you go to school and then you do the thing. That's kind of like the expectation. And I really did want to help people in that way. I really did want to work with people's health. Like that was a big desire in me. I also did a course in plant medicine, and I also have done a life coaching course. And so I had probably 5 or 6 years of preparation for this dream to happen, for me to be this wellness coach or something. And at the end of it, at the end of my nutritional therapy course, I felt this lack of desire to actually be a nutritional therapist when I had felt so much of that desire in the beginning. And it was really hard for me to realize that I didn't want to do it. But to shame myself into thinking that it was wrong for me to ever do it in the first place was definitely like a temptation. I definitely did have moments where I was mad at myself for making that decision. But in the end, I actually healed myself of a sickness that I'd had for a year. And I learned how to take care of myself on a deep level, which enhanced our relationship. And it gave me more confidence. And so that decision didn't turn out like I expected it to. But if I would have kept going with it, I don't think I would be content right now. I don't think I would be happy with being a nutritional therapist. I just don't think it was what was meant to be. But so dropping that desire and moving on was super freeing for me. And I've done that over and over and over again now. And practicing that in our lives is super helpful on an individual level as well as in relationship. So that's my individual example of that. But the example of the property, we purchased this property 3 years ago and dreamed our whole life up with it. Everything was directed toward the property, probably for a good 5 or 6 years. Also, all of our energy was like, this is our dream. This is our dream. This is our dream. And, one day I had gotten fed up. I got fed up basically with the lifestyle we were living. We had been living in a way that was really emotionally damaging to us for about 8 years. And the property was holding us back from a new life. And I could see it clearly. And I remembered Johnny telling me everything is negotiable. And so I brought that up to him and I was like, we might need to sell the property. And he was totally open to it. And we ended up doing it. But we first actually, to leave our living situation, we decided to buy tickets to South Africa and live there for 3 months before selling the property, and just kind of infuse a little bit of risk and a little bit of novelty into our relationship by severing from our old dream, by taking an adventure and leading us into our new life. It was kind of like a baptism into our new life, I'd say. We can only follow desires. We can't have full control over what the outcome of following those desires is going to be. And so we can have dreams, we can have goals, we can have, like those are beautiful things to as an individual and as a couple, to have dreams and goals together. It gives us something to look forward to. But once we start clenching to that goal and that dream and not letting it go when it's obviously done or it's obviously died or we obviously need to change directions, that's when the problems arise. And so when there's that unwillingness to relinquish a dream or let go of an idea that we had, we cease growing. We don't see the new paths that are opening up all around us. And as an individual, this is already it can already be difficult enough to like follow your desires. But when you have two people, we're both trying to follow desires together sometimes. So, with our land, like that was a decision we had to make together to sell it. But because both of us are open to that idea of everything is negotiable, we both understood that it was time. And it has enhanced our relationship to let go of that, because now the possibilities are endless. We got to the point where we felt kind of stuck there, that we felt like we're paying our mortgage, we can't afford to build anything, we're stuck in this living situation that is making us go crazy. And all at once, when we bought our tickets to South Africa, we basically said, no more, we're done. We're not going to let this dream turn into like what it's turning into, which was no longer enjoyable for us and which was no longer feasible for us. And so knowing when to let those things go.
It's a super common question that I come across in a lot of my reading and research. Many, many people want to know or want some direction or guidance around that idea of when should I give up and quit, and when should I persevere?
Yeah.
So we hear a lot of stories about perseverance, about people pushing through the difficulties, the challenges, overcoming, never giving up. All these very inspiring stories of people overcoming all, against all odds, achieving their dreams. The sort of a determining factor in that is that they achieved their dreams. They didn't achieve a dream they used to have. As long as you continue to feel compelled by the outcome. But I think the main fear for people is that they're beating their head against a wall.
Yeah.
And that ultimately they're going to try to go against all odds to achieve something that's just not going to happen.
Well, first of all, you have to ask yourself, do I actually want this, or is it an expectation that somebody else has for me? So for a lot of people going to school or trying to get that job or whatever goal it is they have, even for me, I for a second went toward a goal that wasn't actually my own desire. It was because someone else had an expectation for my life. And so I think the first thing to ask is, do we want this? Do I want this? Like, is this actually a desire within me? Is this really something that's welling up inside of me that brings me joy and that makes me feel lit up? That's the first step. We can't look all the way into the future and see what the end is. And so the first step needs to be, there's a flame that is lit inside of us for this thing. And that's where we start. And that's, really all we can do at the beginning is have that spark. And then as we move into the goal and the dream, it most likely is going to get more difficult for us, because like you said, there's stories of perseverance and overcoming all the odds. Like there is an amount of effort that needs to be put into a goal. We spent 2 years paying for our property, putting a driveway in, researching, like we put the work in to try to make that dream a reality. And then at some point it was like financially it just didn't make sense. And that's when we had to let it go. And we also started to realize maybe we don't want to live here. We started being really honest with ourselves. And I think people don't stop to create space for honesty.
I think in general, we put far too much pressure on each individual decision that we make in life, thinking that one decision is going to determine the course of our entire life. And even if one decision could determine the course of our entire life, there'd be no way for us to identify which decision that is. The web of cause and effect in life is far too complex for us to ever wrap our heads around. any model of cause and effect that we do have in our brain is vastly oversimplified and is more a story that we tell ourselves to out of an attempt to make sense of things that isn't really based in reality, but is ultimately just an overly simplistic narrative that we can use to console ourselves. But I think in pursuing the land, for example, we learned so much that now we can apply that knowledge to a ton of other things in our life. And I imagine people would say the same about past relationships they've had, past jobs that we've had, so many different things that, if depending on how we tell the story, could look like a failure or could look like a stepping stone.
Yep.
And it's up to us to decide how we're going to tell that story.
Yeah. Is it a stepping stone or a failure?
I think the temptation is to fear the opinions of others in clinging to our goals or in letting go of our goals. It might look to some people like our land adventure was a failure, like we couldn't make it happen and we failed. And whether people think that or not, I don't really care. But to me, I can say, no, I just changed my mind. I would say the same with a number of marriages that I've watched form and dissolve.
Yeah.
They weren't necessarily failures. They were stepping stones. And
Yeah.
each person went in with the belief that that was going to be a lifetime thing. But at some point, it stopped making sense. One of the other dangers of keeping open negotiations is that it allows us to give up when things become difficult. And so a couple questions that I might ask myself if I am considering using an exit is, am I trying to avoid something difficult? Or am I trying to coerce or manipulate my partner?
Right.
And one, I guess, is an escape for me. One is an effort to change the other person. And
Yeah.
I think those are good things to be aware of in looking at that, in keeping that option on the table so that the relationship does remain a choice at all times and not become something that a person feels stuck in or trapped.
Right. I mean, it's like you said in the last episode about commitment, it's like a dynamic, was it static commitment versus dynamic commitment?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like a dynamic commitment is one that uses that idea for growth and honestly, like having this idea so prevalent in our relationship makes it so much less suffocating to be in a life partnership. You know, because that is a real issue for some people, is a feeling of suffocation, a feeling like they've lost their freedom, and therefore the novelty kind of goes out the door because you're living your life with this person and it gets mundane and you get into routines and patterns, and taking risks and allowing for things to be negotiable is scary for a lot of people because then they lose their facade of control. It's already a facade. I mean, we really don't have control fully.
As with cause and effect narratives, power narratives, control narratives are also illusory and vast oversimplifications.
So yeah, I guess for us, like this idea of everything is negotiable, to me is really exciting in our relationship. Like it makes me excited because it means that if I have an idea arise in me or a new direction, I know that I can come to you and you're going to be open to hearing me and to talking about the possibility of going that new direction or doing that new thing, or, you know, letting go of some expectation that we have over each other so that we can grow. And
Remember Ram Dass said, make friends with change. And I think for life in general, that's very wise and prudent course to take. I've said before, and borrowing partially from Alan Watts, that the vast majority of our frustration in life comes from trying to stop things that are moving and straighten things that are wiggly. So instead of trying to resist those forces of change and motion, to relax into them or turn our boat downstream, as some have said, and ride with those currents. The difference between basically being in the ocean getting pounded by the waves versus being on a surfboard riding them.
Yeah, you're using the chaos to like ride, which is awesome.
Yeah.
And I feel like it the byproduct is that you get that novelty in your relationship that a lot of people feel like is missing when they are in a committed life partnership. Novelty tends to go out the door because the safer you get with somebody, the less risky it gets. And so risk is kind of what creates novelty. And so when you have this infused into your relationship, novelty actually can be revived and stay as like a major part of your relationship for years, for your whole life, possibly. And for you and I feel like our, the risks that we've taken, the doors that we've closed, the expectations we've let go of, all these things have kept our relationship a little bit mysterious to me and a little bit mysterious to you. So I don't fully know you, and we've been together for 10 years, but you have shocked me over and over and over again because you have made friends with change.
If you ever think you do know me, then the next moment I've moved on to something
and
different.
I want to always be somebody who like gives you that space and doesn't suffocate you, because I am curious about you and I don't always know what you're going to do next, and you don't always know what I'm going to do next. And I think people start to get comfortable in their relationships and expect that their partner is going to be the same person that they were last year. And you and I have tried to infuse this idea of even earlier today, you may have been someone different than you are now. I mean, you are someone different than you were earlier today. And so if I hold old expectations, old dreams, or old ideas over you, then how are you supposed to grow? How are you supposed to change? How are you supposed to surprise me? How are we supposed to have novelty?
Yeah, it makes me think that something, an idea, a goal, a dream, a destination can at one time be expanding, but at another time can become limiting. Totally. Same exact idea, same exact dream. A dream for me individually that might be incredibly expanding. If I want to make $100,000 a year, that's a very expanding dream. But for a person that makes $500,000 a year, that's a very limiting dream. Just, on a very practical level. If I get to a point where I am making X amount of dollars, if I cling to that dream, I'm only holding myself back. I need to update my dreams. I need to update my operating system.
Yeah, there's like a combination of updating and letting go. Some dreams you just need to let go.
You have to let go of the old
to
make room for the new, as we said.
Yeah.
And that can be scary because it's what we're used to. It's what we're comfortable with. It's what we are accustomed to. It's where our habits are, our routines, all these things. But that becomes it becomes stagnant at some point.
Well, people want safety and stability almost as much as they want risk and novelty. And the two are really difficult to have together. I don't believe it's impossible, though. I believe that that's what we are always working toward, is having the stability and safety of our relationship combined with novelty, adventure, and risk, which is part of the reason we travel too, like things that actually really, truly infuse adventure into our relationship.
I think in general, if one can let go of the idea of a rival, then life all of a sudden becomes far less frustrating.
It's so true.
I remember times in my life when I've been under the illusion that with just a little bit more work or a little bit more of this or that, I was going to finally arrive at a place where everything would be okay. And that place of arrival often looked, in my mind, in my imagination, was a place where moving things were not moving and wiggly things were straight. But the more I think about that, the less appealing that state actually becomes. Alan Watts will joke that a completely predictable future is the past.
Yeah.
In a chess game, when it gets to the point where we can see that one person is going to win, we stop playing. Even if all the moves haven't quite been finished out yet. Once it's checkmate, then that's it. Let's move on to the next game because we know the outcome. Why even bother? We move through life often. I've moved through life thinking that I want control, thinking that I want predictability. And I want some amount of control. I want some amount of predictability in my life, but ultimately that's not what I want completely.
Yeah.
I like that unpredictability. I like the unexpected. Alan Watts also joked that in order for there to be such thing as a pleasant surprise, there has to be unpleasant surprises. If there was only pleasant surprises, then they wouldn't be a surprise.
Exactly.
There'd just be pleasant things and that's it. So you have to have unpleasant surprises in order for there to be pleasant ones. It's the wave nature of reality, and that every wave has a crest and has a trough, and you can't have a crest without a trough. You can't have a trough without a crest. That's the way waves are. Mm-hmm. And if physics has taught us anything, it's that everything is waves.
Yeah. And I mean, Tony Robbins has this idea of 6 human needs, and 2 of the 6 human needs are certainty and uncertainty. That's 2 of the top 6 human needs that most people are going after. And so how do we have a life partnership or a marriage that can have certainty mixed with uncertainty? That's the goal. That's the new marriage, you know? That's what we're after, is can we have a safe relationship where we feel secure and we feel like we have this space we can grow in safety, but also have the benefit of novelty, not just in our sexual relationship, but all across the board, where we take risks together and we, sometimes we're unsure of how things are going to go. Sometimes we're like, we don't have enough money. Like when we booked our tickets to South Africa, we actually didn't have enough money to take the trip. But I just trusted that it was the right step. It felt like it was the right step for us. And I knew that if we just made the decision and then we basically just tried to get jobs before we left, that we would be able to do it. And we both got huge jobs, basically the month or a couple weeks before we flew out.
One of them I even finished while we were in South Africa.
Exactly. So, Johnny and I have worked really hard at this combination of certainty and uncertainty in our relationship.
Yeah, I think it all comes back to that idea of making friends with change. Change, the only constant is change, is that old saying. And if you can get used to that, and not only get used to it, but actually start to appreciate it and learn to see it for what it is in the moment. I remember in one of the last episodes of The Office, I think Kevin says, I wish there was a way to know that you were in the good old days while you were in them.
Yeah.
And I think for me, as I learn to observe my thoughts more than be controlled by them, that's helped me a lot to realize that it's always the good old days.
Yeah.
No matter what. I've said before, you're always on your path.
Making this podcast is the good old days.
Yeah, hopefully we will look back on this experience at some point and say, man, remember when we were recording those first episodes of the podcast?
In our living room.
Yeah, sitting in our living room. And maybe that'd be a helpful tactic for people sometimes when things are difficult, when things feel frustrating, when you just want to explode and freak out, to take a moment and try to look at the experience from 5, 10, 20 years in the future and try to think about all the things that this experience will teach you, the things that you will take with you from the experience. Challenge, friction, difficulty, that's where learning occurs. I heard someone say one time that if you win, then you don't learn anything. It's the team that loses in a game or the person that loses in a game that learns.
Well, and the winning team has probably learned from a lot of mistakes before that happened, before the winning actually happened.
Absolutely.
And, I think a lot of times we look at the winners in life and we covet their winning, and we don't usually we don't see what brought them there, the whole story before.
In listening to interviews with lots and lots of people who are fit the kind of stereotypical definition of successful, many of them have said that the key to their success was that they've simply failed far more than most people. And by that, they don't mean that failing a lot is the key to success. They mean that they've taken a lot of at-bats. Yeah. They've stepped into that unknown, that uncharted territory, that place of risk where the fears and the doubts can feel overwhelming. They've stepped into that area, that arena so many times that they've been able to harvest so many lessons and so much wisdom from all those failures that success in whatever it is that they are pursuing becomes practically inevitable.
Yeah.
It's only by being wrong that we can learn to be right. And
there's a lot of people who, and I mean, I'll speak for myself, but there's been many moments in our relationship where I have not wanted to be wrong. And I have stood my ground and not made friends with change because it was so uncomfortable. Like, it is really uncomfortable sometimes to change and grow and, become the winning team, basically, in a relationship.
I remember Seth Godin said in one of his daily emails that the emergency you were dealing with a year ago doesn't exist. Things that in the moment can feel so intense and all-consuming, a couple years later, you're like, oh, that doesn't actually exist anymore.
Even the next day.
Sometimes
it happens. Yeah. I mean, for me, like, I can have like some intense emotional waves where I get really in a high and I can go really into a low. And when I'm in a low, sometimes I can barely see outside of it. It's like I'm in this fog and I just can't see past the fog. And so in that moment, I'm like questioning our relationship. I'm like, are we going to stay together? Is this the end? Like, I can get really, really wrapped up in my emotions. And it's something I've noticed. And so now because I've noticed that usually the next day I'm totally fine. Now when I'm in those moments, I don't shame myself for having them, but I'm using a new tactic, a different way of being in those moments that doesn't take me down this spiral of darkness, thinking that like everything's a loss. And like remembering that these dark moments are what lead us to the light moments, or lead us to the moments where we are really in love with one another. Like, I feel way more in love when we work through the hard shit together and we make decisions together and let go of things together and stop having expectations of each other. Like, all these things play into like really actually feeling in love with you, There's
another nice metaphor from surfing in that when I go down and am getting tumbled by the wave, If I'm resisting that, then I'm going to be tense, using up my energy, reducing my oxygen and putting myself in a much worse situation that is ultimately inevitable. I can't resist a wave. It's far too powerful. And so if I can actually relax in that moment, allow myself to be tossed around a bit, wait for it to subside, and then I can pop up for a breath, I'm going to be far better off than if I had tried to resist the whole experience of being tossed around. So when when you're in a place of feeling sort of at the bottom of your emotional wave, as we say, then if you can just ride that out and not resist it, not judge it, not shame yourself for feeling that way, but just observe it, sit with it, and ride it out, then you still have the same exact experience, but in one case, you're living in resistance to that experience, which is this place of suffering and fear. And in the other case, you're living congruent, or you're living in synchronicity with that and just allowing it to be as it is.
Well, and seeing it as a marker, seeing it as something that is taking you down to teach you something, so that when you come back up for air and the next wave is coming, you're like, okay, I actually think I can ride this wave in a different way, or I think I've learned something that I can apply to this next wave.
Yeah, I think that one could look at an emotional wave as two different opportunities. The part of the wave that's above the x-axis that we would consider positive is perhaps a time where we feel motivated, we feel inspired, and a lot can be accomplished, and we can really push things forward and use that energy that comes with that time. And the things that we feel, the thoughts that come up in the down part of the wave, the parts below the x-axis that we would generally consider negative, are sort of a check-in with our subconscious, and the thoughts that come up can be indicators of what's going on.
Yeah, it's like we're below, so we're below the surface.
Yeah, you get this behind the scenes look. So I know I've been able to identify for myself over the years many different things that I can learn from any emotion that in the past I may have judged as negative. Mm-hmm. For example, if I feel regret, then I know to look for something that I've learned.
Yeah.
So if I feel that regret, I can just say, I guess I must have learned something. What did I learn? If I'm regretting a thing that I did or a way that I responded to something, then I've learned that response is not actually a good way to go, and that in the future I can do things differently. If I feel anger, then perhaps there is a boundary that I haven't set. A limit of mine is being crossed or has been crossed. And so if I feel angry, I can, instead of getting caught up in that and reacting out of my anger, I can instead take a deeper look and try to look at where are my boundaries being crossed? Where do I need to be a little bit more firm in what I'm allowing in my life, or something like that? So pretty much any negative emotion, I could probably go through every single negative emotion and probably identify what it is that might actually be going on in that situation. Some benefit, some lesson, some gift that emotion has to offer. And not being reactive sets the scene for actually being able to do that work.
Well, and you're practicing not being reactive with yourself, which then helps you be not reactive with me.
Yeah, I know if you're angry, then it's the same deal. Oh, she must feel like a boundary has been crossed, or that she's tolerating something in her life that she shouldn't tolerate.
You need, it's a moment where, as a partner, when you see the other person going through what you might consider to be a negative emotion, it's a time to be more curious than reactive. And it's the same as when we started this podcast and we had to stop this specific episode because you were hungry and your blood sugar was not balanced. And so then we couldn't record because the state we were in wasn't, good for recording. So always like approaching your partner with curiosity instead of just jumping to the conclusion that they're, being ridiculous or, making them feel shame for how they feel. We can approach it with more like a detective work.
Somebody once described it to me as basically using the most respectful interpretation
Yeah, the most respectful interpretation
of someone's actions, and unless they prove to you otherwise.
Yeah.
If someone says something to me that sounds, where I could easily reach the conclusion of that person's an asshole, a more respectful interpretation of their action might be that person's having a really tough day, and what they're saying, the way they're acting, doesn't really actually mean anything about me.
And it also depends on who you're interacting with. If it's a stranger, you kind of have to just let that go because you don't know them.
Yeah.
With your partner, you've set some boundaries with me where I was maybe not treating you very well. And you could be like, oh, maybe Bailey's blood sugar is off. But at the end of the day, like, you don't have to take abuse because of it.
Oh, certainly not.
So there's a line, there's a fine line here too.
Yeah, I think any idea can be twisted. Like we've said, the idea of keeping negotiations open can become a coercion and a threat, or it can become a way to avoid difficult things. And I will say, if one is in a habit of avoiding difficult things in life, then we're missing out on a whole host of opportunities.
Yeah.
In permaculture, there's a saying that we are confronted by insurmountable opportunities. And so people we even try to avoid using the language of problems. There's another permaculture principle that the problem is the solution. For example, if your garden gets very little sun, that could be seen as a problem, or it could be seen as an opportunity in that certain things do really well with just a tiny bit of sun. Or, for instance, something like mushrooms can only be grown in a place where the sun's not going to toast them. So anything that looks like a problem in a relationship can be seen as an opportunity, something that can be leveraged to initiate some growth, some change. And, I mean, for example, when we left for South Africa last winter, that was born out of an incredibly difficult time where I felt continually frustrated, downtrodden, sort of beaten up by life circumstances. But that provided us with the motivation to make some huge changes that have opened us up to a whole world of possibilities that before, had we clung to that old way of doing things, we would have shut out all those new opportunities.
Yeah, we shook up our entire life, basically. Sold everything we had, moved out of a long-term situation, and just kind of started from scratch.
So many of the most transformative times in my life have been when I've been able and had the privilege to be able to step out of my life for a moment and kind of view it from the outside.
Yeah.
Take stock of it.
It can be a privilege for sure.
No, I realize that for a lot of people, it's seemingly impossible to be able to just up and leave the country for 3 months. Or, I mean, these things are an immense privilege for us.
I mean, we don't have kids.
Yeah.
So that's something. And I mean, but I've also, if you want inspiration for people that travel with their kids, there's a great documentary on Netflix called Given. It's a couple that surfs and lives in a van with their kid and just kind of shows you another example of possibilities. I think finding people that we can look at that are like us. So, Johnny and I might not be the example, like our lifestyle might not be like your lifestyle. So to make the same decisions we've made might not work for you. But finding people who have made decisions that have similar lifestyles to you, similar worldviews, maybe similar incomes, and seeing kind of how they get creative with their life can be really helpful. It's very expanding. So we're not saying like this is an option for every person in the world to do what we've done, but everybody has to look at their own situation and get creative with it.
I mean, in general, the default options that are offered by our society or culture, if you will, are not designed to maximize individual happiness or alignment or self-realization or what, like the health of the individual is not the goal of our society, unfortunately. And that unfortunately the health of the communities doesn't even seem to be the goal. Unfortunately, we're kind of exist in this system where the unstated goal is to maximize monetary profits for a small group number of people. And so in order to find fulfillment and health and a thriving relationship, we often have to look outside. We have to exercise some creativity and look outside of just the standard menu of options that is presented to us. And that in itself is challenging, because then we can find ourselves in a position where it's very easy to feel judged or even overlooked by the society or by our culture. I was thinking earlier about how I've never in my life felt like I had a very culturally compelling answer to the question, what do you do? That's so common. It's been working at a coffee shop. It's been doing odd construction jobs. It's been a lot of different things, none of which in and of themselves are bad. But as far as our culture is concerned, aren't, at least what I felt, the answers that people would be impressed by.
Yeah.
And the bonus of that is that it's forced me to come to an understanding of my own value and worth as a human being, separate from those measurements that get applied to us from the outside. And like you said, the point of us sharing our desires, our story, and the things we've learned from our experience is not that people would try to follow a prescribed course of action, but instead that people would be inspired, motivated, and equipped to think for themselves, to think outside the box that we inevitably get placed into, and sort of break free of those limitations and think for themselves as to what it is that might bring them that fulfillment. And following your desires is, from what I can tell, like a good way to go about that. Just don't get too attached to the outcome.
Yeah.
Because you don't know where your desires are going to lead you. They often don't lead you to the destination that a specific desire would suggest.
Yeah. Exactly.
So to stay open-minded, to keep kind of an open-ended idea of where life is going feels far more freeing to me than getting attached to any one way of doing things.
Yeah.
And there is no arrival, really. There's micro arrivals, maybe.
Yeah.
We could
that's
grant
true.
that. But there's never a place that one can get to in life where things
Or
stay.
just stay. Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly. We're all riding waves, all of us. Every single person is riding waves. Our waves look different, but we're all riding them. So some of these ideas can be helpful across the board. Some of them are that just pertain to our story. But we hope that just kind of talking about these ideas brings you some revival in your relationship to, and in your individual life to think about how you might apply the idea of everything is negotiable.
Yeah, as we make friends with change, we open ourselves up to receiving the gifts that it has to offer. And as long as we live in resistance to change, we are likely going to find ourselves frustrated, overwhelmed, even angry or resentful that life isn't going the way we think it should. Should is overall a word that we try to avoid using in our life.
Yeah.
I often make the joke, compared to what? Basically, if something like, should I do this? It's like, well, compared to what? Based on what? And maybe that's getting a little too
that could
esoteric.
Could open up. Well, and who is it? Tony Robbins that says we should all over ourselves. It's Kyle Cease.
A number of people have made that joke. Cease. Yeah.
Kyle Cease, I think, said that in his.
Yeah, he probably wasn't the first.
He is an awesome comedian and like self-development kind of guy. He combines comedy with these ideas, and I just love him. So if you need some laughter in your life that also is helpful for growth, Kyle Cease is a cool guy.
Yeah. Stop shitting all over yourself.
Stop shitting all over yourself. Stop shitting all over your partner. And, open yourself up to like big things, crazy things happening, instead of like having that death grip on things that have died or things that are done. So yeah, I think that'll do it for episode number 3. And also, as we are a new podcast, it's super helpful if you support us by subscribing or leaving a review. That just helps us out a lot. And if this has been something that is beneficial to you and your relationship and your life, then we would love to hear from you how that is affecting you. And
thanks for taking the time to listen.
Yes, thank you guys. This is Torches Together.